Joining me now, a man many of you know, founder of Steinberg Sports Entertainment, super agent Leigh Steinberg. Leigh, thanks for a few minutes today.
It's my pleasure.
I have so many questions for you because as someone that covers the 49ers, this Jimmy Garoppolo situation has just taken over everything about the team this offseason. You are no stranger to 49ers and 49ers quarterbacks, having represented Steve Young for so long. And I'm planning on getting a Steve Young story or two from you before we go. But let me just start with this Jimmy Garoppolo thing, because I want to get your perspective as someone obviously that's been in the business for a while. When you have a player and the team says, look, it's not going to work out, we're going to look to trade you in the offseason, what are your responsibilities as an agent at that point?
Your responsibility is to anticipate far ahead of the actual event happening what would be the best result for the player. And you could see that when they drafted Trey Lance from North Dakota State, that they obviously were taking him that high so he'd be their quarterback. The big question today is, can you qualify as a franchise quarterback? And that's someone a team can build around for 10 to 12 years. They can win because of rather than with. And importantly, can they, in adversity, in critical situations, they've thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the center's looking at the quarterback like he's on hallucinations for his play calling. What does he do then? The game's getting out of hand. Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, and take a team to and through victory to get to the Super Bowl? So obviously, if they thought Garoppolo was that, they don't draft Lance. And so the minute that draft comes across, you know that you're going to have to eventually find another place for that quarterback.
And so what are you doing then as an agent? Are you kind of calling other gentlemen?
Right. You're looking at quarterback rosters. And if you can get the permission from the team to do it. And depending on who's got the best contacts, you can work together to try and find him a home. My part of it would be selling the new franchise on why this is a good move for them and making sure that quarterback's presented to best effect. But the point is, what would be a desirable place for him? And again, it's the 49ers made that decision to try to find a new franchise quarterback. So, he sat on the bench for a year. Now the question is he ready? But he had a year of tutelage like a Mahomes or Drew Brees or Carson Palmer or Aaron Rodgers, who all had time behind someone. And now the question is he ready? So the problem is that when you look at the contract that Garoppolo signed, it was to be a franchise quarterback. I mean, the numbers are a little higher today, but $25 million for a year and a salary of $24 million and all that salary counts against the cap. And so their best move for the 49ers is see if they can get someone to trade for him. Otherwise, they take a cap hit when they trade him, but at least they get rid of $24 million of the cap. And that's a lot. That's over a tenth of the whole cap and on one player who's not going to start.
I am keenly aware of that. And now, unfortunately, it seems like there's no trade partners left for Jimmy Garoppolo. So now there's a situation where maybe he's on the team come training camp. He's injured, which is a big factor, I think, in all of this. And I said that I thought that he and his team took their time deciding whether or not to have the surgery in an effort to make it harder to trade him and hopefully get him released. Obviously, you don't know the specifics of the situation, but is that something that is done, or is that a crazy conspiracy theory by me?
I don't know the individual facts of that situation at all. But the impediment to trading a player like that is the size of the contract, because unless he's going to start, I doubt that a team is going to pick up that much salary against the cap. So ultimately, the only question is it desirable from the player standpoint to be waived, and then take your own look at the free agent market? The later that it gets in the off season, the harder it is, because as opposed to having the entire off season have a quarterback integrate into the new offense and have some time to work with his people, it gets more problematic as they go along. It's sort of a game of musical chairs. Having said that, the deck constantly reshuffles, and even though it's the off season, there are injuries, there are things that happen. They happen very quickly in training camp. So the way it looks right now might not be the way it looks in 3 months.
And that's totally fair. And I think that's what the 49ers are sort of counting on, as they now have to hang on to Jimmy Garoppolo for a little while. One of the things that we had heard in this whole process was that the 49ers had told Jimmy and his people that they would kind of work with him to find a destination. In your experience, how valuable is a promise like that from a team? Is that something you think you can trust, or is it kind of like a nice thing to say, but when it comes down to it, the team's going to do what's best for the team?
Well, I represented John Lynch for part of his career, and I can tell you that his word means quite a bit. And I'm sure, and if you know his heart, and as well as his astute business mind, you know that I'm sure he was sincere. So that's a big help, because, and asking to be traded is never publicly the way to go about the situation, because then other teams know you have damaged goods and will not make a fair trade offer. So I think that situation has been reasonably quiet that way, and that's a good thing. And again, you come to this juncture in a quarterback's career where the team's made the decision to go a different direction. And then you have to make a decision, especially when you're prospectively going to get a large amount of money if you would stay there. Then you have to make a decision how to restart the quarterback's career. In other words, what is the right place? So you might look at somewhere where he can't start immediately, but there's an aging quarterback there who maybe has another 1 or 2 years left, or a situation where there's not an established starter. And there still are some of those situations around where they have a starter. And then the draft is going to play into this. Now, people are saying it's not as prolific a draft in terms of quarterbacks, that you have Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, and quarterback Carroll. But I will tell you, that position is so critical, and the game is so quarterback centric, that don't be surprised whether or not your own perspective is that these draftees don't merit it. They may go very high anyway, because this is a draft without great offensive stars. And the point about getting the quarterback is you could wait as a franchise forever and not get an opportunity. So part of the rationale is, if someone's holding a high draft pick, and they need a quarterback, even if those quarterbacks are not Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes coming off the board, they may want to go ahead and take that quarterback high. So he may get an inflated draft bump because the position's so critical. And that may take some teams off the market. So that would factor into the analysis also. Which teams could Garoppolo prospectively go to that may draft high? And because you don't want to go from one situation where you're sitting behind Trey Lance to another where you're sitting behind a young person. I mean, Garoppolo played well last year, but it's must be the 49ers analysis. They needed an upgrade, and they went ahead and drafted. So that the day that decision was made, you would know, representing the player, that it's there's going to be a change, and you'd like to get ahead of it.
Have you had any interactions with Garoppolo's agent, Don Yee? Can you give us any kind of insight into the type of person he is?
Oh, Don Yee's a veteran agent. He's represented Tom Brady for years. He's very smart. He has good judgment. I'm sure he'll handle the situation really well. And he's been around for not as long as me, but I started when woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers were on the earth. But he's been around a long time, and he's bright, and he has connections. I'm sure he'll do a good job.
If I could just transition away from Jimmy Garoppolo for a minute, because the other two contracts for the 49ers are Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa. And I was surprised to hear John Lynch say that the contracts have already been budgeted for those guys. As an agent, if you've got a client that's close to a new deal and you hear the general manager say that their deals have already been budgeted for, I imagine that's music to your ears, right?
Well, if what he meant by that was a contract extension is happening, yes. And you can do a contract extension after a player's third year in the league. And what you look for in those situations is a signing bonus that sort of equalizes the differential between the remaining years on the contract and the player's market value. And that's usually done by a bonus, and then the contract's extended out a year or two. But what happens with large contracts for key players is they almost become like lending banks, where if a big salary is coming up, that contract can be redone every year, and a bonus can be paid to substitute for salary, and the salary can be dropped, and the contract can be made much more cap friendly. And the motivation for players in that situation is that if they restructure, it allows the team to have a much more robust roster and everyone's aspirations to go to the Super Bowl.
And when you negotiate, for example, like Patrick Mahomes, is that something that you basically plan for on the back end of the contract? Like, okay, we know these years will probably be restructured by the time we get to them.
Yes. And the reality is, if you just look at the formula, which is to get a cap number, look at the signing bonus associated with it, and amortize it or divide it by the number of years of the contract, that's what counts against the cap from the bonus each year. And then all salary counts against the cap. So the fastest way to readjust a contract is to drop a salary and pay a big signing bonus.
Now, I can't let you go without asking you for a couple of Steve Young stories. For my money, I wish Steve Young was playing today, because I think he would make $1 zillion with his combination of throwing accuracy and running speed. But when I say the name Steve Young, what's the first thing that jumps into your mind?
Brilliant, very, 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 very bright. The second thing is escapability. Now, he became a great quarterback when he went into the Niners system and became more of a pocket quarterback. But oh my God, he was so dangerous because Howie Long once told me, if you come up and rush him, he'll high percentage pass over you. And if you don't rush him, he'll run it up your throat. So he was that way. But Steve went through a tough time when he was backing up Joe Montana, and we never would have assented to a trade, except that Bill Walsh said Joe Montana had a bad back and he was going to be injured. Now, I was living in the Bay Area at that time. I knew what an icon Montana did, and the problem with ever replacing someone like that is that once you do, in the mind's eye of the fans, Montana would have completed every pass. He never threw an interception. He won every game, and they went to the Super Bowl every year. That's the standard they're controlling them against. So so Steve, thank goodness for law school, because he would have gone stir crazy, especially in the off seasons, if he wasn't getting his law degree. And but they go down to play the Super Bowl against the Chargers in 1994, and he throws 6 touchdown passes and is MVP of the game. And I get down on the field, and he runs up to me and says, "The monkey's off my back, the monkey's off my back." And it was sort of a joyful afternoon.
And that was before he threw up on your shoes in the limousine, right?
Oh, there was that too, yes. The funniest thing was Steve was so dehydrated because he had this pushy agent who told him he should do all these interviews after the game. And he didn't have enough hydration, that he got sick in the car, and then he's back and the players are having their victory party, and Steve's up lying on his bed with IV coming out of his arm, looking like the Last Supper.
What did you do with the shoes?
Bronze them, of course.
Oh, Leigh, that is a fantastic story. I wish it ended better for you and your shoes, but what can you do? So Steve Young is one of my favorite players of all time. Did you get a lot of calls from Steve, frustrated with the situation with Joe and having to wait and all that?
Well, he had made a decision that there was something unique enough about the 49ers system and that supporting cast that even if he had to miss a year or two more, when he eventually got to start, that he would do what he did, which is to make the Hall of Fame. I wanted him to be traded because I thought that the fans there might never appreciate him for him, and he'd always be in the shadow of Montana. Plus, I didn't want him to lose those years, but he was pretty firm about that. He didn't want to be traded. I mean, the irony of it was that there was one year where Montana was backed up by Young, who was backed up by Bono. Mm-hmm. And I think that year, Steve Young was the 5th highest paid player in the league, and Montana was the 1st. So they had these two quarterbacks on one roster, which you don't see anymore because of the salary cap. You can't put, which is the problem that Garoppolo, is facing. And that they had 2 of the 5 highest paid players in football at the same position.
That's crazy. My last question is about the end of Steve's career, because he said in his book that actually Mike Shanahan tried to recruit him to go to the Broncos after John Elway retired. How close to happening was that? And did he talk to you about that?
Well, certainly. It was close. A lot of people were surprised that Tom Brady changed his mind. I wasn't, because most players don't leave the sport of football willingly. Their talent has faded. They can't get a big contract. They have injuries that make them fade. And then you would say to me, well, look at Tom Brady, he went out on top. Yeah, and changed his mind, a month later.
Yeah.
And without being specific, I've had a series of quarterbacks retire into the world. They've got a great job in media. They have a good family life. They've saved all their money. Everything is wonderful. Their second career is all set. But 3 or 4 weeks in the season, they'll call and say, "Oh my God," because they miss the camaraderie in the locker room. They miss the structure that they've always had from the sport, and they miss the competitive nature of it. And so even in these situations that look beautifully orchestrated, like the player goes off on the sunset, it's not like, unless you were his agent, you wouldn't know that they perpetually have second thoughts.
Did you have to talk people out of attempting comebacks?
It depended on the physical nature of what they were facing. I've been campaigning on the issue of concussion and trying to create prevention, awareness, and cure for many, many years. And what I cared most about was that players who I had a great deal of affection for had a healthy long-term life ahead, much more than they played another year.
Yeah, that's something I think that the league is grappling with. And it seems like obviously now they're in a much better place than they were even a few years ago. Leigh Steinberg, thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
My pleasure, anytime.